Greetings and salutations, Nubians and others when you come later. Hi. Hello there, Dr.
Hey,
Carr.
hey, Professor Hunter, how are you, my dear?
I am awesome. Well rested. I'm energized and I love wherever you are. That's beautiful.
Yeah,
I like a nice stay. I like things, lovely
well,
things. That's
your
beautiful.
friend, your friends here in Nubia without a K would invite you to come here. The architect of Nubia with a K, and a lot of Nubians here, of course, with us. But yeah, we're here on Elephantine Island. We are in Aswan, which in ancient times known as Abu. So this is the land that faces inner Africa, the south of Egypt, not too far from
Okay, wait,
Sudan.
wait. So, all right. So Egypt's at the top, the north.
Uh-huh. And within
Well,
Egypt, there are, if you look at Egypt like a square of sorts, at the Mediterranean is Alexandria and all those places, the resort towns. They building a new resort town, insane, and you see all these billboards with Sylvester Stallone of all people advertising this new city they built on the Mediterranean. Yeah, exactly, it's crazy, right? So that's Alexandria. We never go there. Then there's Cairo, which is in the Nile Delta, nearer the Mediterranean, but still inner Africa, coming down or up the Nile, because the Nile runs from the south to the north, as we know. And that's where Cairo is, Giza. That's where the pyramids are that we know, Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure, the Great Pyramid, such. And then we come up the Nile to the middle part of the country, near the middle part of the country, to a place called Luxor, ancient name Waset, or the scepter. That's like where the spiritual center of ancient Egypt was, the priesthood, particularly of Amun Ra. And so we just left there and we bust about 5.5 hours from there to the next stop, which is in the south of the square, and that is Aswan. This is near the second cataract. Those know the history of the Nile. They have six cataracts. The first cataract is in the northern part of Egypt, then the second cataract, third cataract, fourth, fifth, sixth. Only two of the cataracts are in Egypt, the first and the second. Then you go into Sudan for the third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Cataracts, of course, these rock formations where the Nile kind of travels over them. And so we are in the south. This area is predominantly Nubian. So if you step out of this beautiful hotel that we're in, the Movenpick, here on Elephantine Island, we're on an island. You got to take a ferry to go back and forth to the mainland in this city of about 1.5 million. You will, if you keep your mouth shut, people will think that we're all from here because these is where the Nubians are. We'll be going to a town that we always go to every year to spend time with the children. We bring supplies and financial support for a village here. That's been going on since the 80s. Asa Hilliard, before him, Yosef Ben Yakin, and people just, we do that. And to see our elder, the great Nubian tour guide, who became a guide at a time in this country decades ago when there were very few tour guides, the great Farouk Carney, see that elder. And so we're here on this island. I'll talk more about the rest of it later. But this is where, in many ways, the country we now know as Egypt faced inner Africa. So all the stuff that we would say as far as Uganda, Ethiopia, places had ancient names like Merowe, Kush, Napata, all of those places, Kerma, those major cities that are in now the Sudan and then beyond. This is where the gateway to inner Africa took place. So we're going to spend the next few days talking about Egypt's relationship with the rest of Africa, very specifically, and enjoying this place. Hey, listen, spas, massages, henna,
I
all
can
that
see
stuff is
the
yes.
staircase tells a story, sir. The staircase
Does the
tells a
staircase tell
story.
a story?
Yeah, it does. It does. It says something. And your demeanor, you feel very relaxed. You feel very stress free. You
Oh,
feel
no
very at
question.
home. I feel like you're at home.
We are. We're at home. Yeah, and it's funny. Our sister, your friend Tanya Pinkins, has been in and out of everything. She's been with us on this journey. They organized a game of bid wits on the bus on the way down here. We stopped at two temples. We Kamambo, which is where the healers in the late period, the so-called Greek Roman period, but the Greeks and Romans didn't live here. It was the Egyptians. Their healing temple, double what do you call it? Double shrine in the back. and also the temple of Heru or Horus at Edfu, which is one of the best preserved temples. Tells the story of Horus and Set. And Tanya, on the way there, we looking. She didn't go to the back of the bus. She's sitting in the front with our guide, our brother Abdul, who is Nubian, who lives in this neighborhood. And we're in the front. Where's Tanya? Tanya's in the back, and they back there playing bit with. I mean, like serious. Apparently, this is a very serious game. You were telling me.
Yeah, I think you would, first of all, absolutely love it, because unlike spades, which, the hand you are dealt is the hand you're dealt, is a lot of luck. With bid whist, if you have a quote unquote bad hand, that hand can be turned into a good hand, because if it's low cards, you can go downtown, or you get to determine the hand that you have, and there's some poker in it. There's so many elements to bid whist. It is a thinking person's game, which is why very few people can play it well. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I haven't played the game since my father passed, because we would play every single Sunday night. That was a ritual. I played Scrabble with him while my mama was at church, and then when my mother came home, her childhood friend Shirley is my father's partner, because married people can't play together, and if they want to stay married, especially if like my mama, who likes to renege and get on the phone.
Oh no!
She don't pay it. So I was her partner. So I was frustrated a lot. But it was a family ritual every Sunday night. We listened to James Cleveland, Shirley Caesar, the O'Neill twins. We play gospel music and play bid whist for 5 hours at least. And I would leave there at like midnight on a Sunday. But yeah, that was our ritual. So I miss it.
Wow.
And so I'm gonna teach you how to play when you come back, because I need a partner.
I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to that. I wish the only thing I regret is because we go always the first 2 weeks of August is that I missed healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Yeah.
So I talked with Baba Motosho just for a second, exchange text. He said it was fantastic. So y'all did that thing in South Carolina, huh?
And Debbie was there she was trying to double dutch in. I was
Oh,
like, ma'am, Debbie,
what
go sit yourself down somewhere. But it
man?
was perfect. It was perfect, because when we did it in January, it was lightning and no thunder and weather. And this
Yeah.
time, so the ancestors are letting us know some things. And I feel very empowered and energized and slightly invincible. I just want to,
Oh, well,
and I'm gonna
that's
say,
perfect.
yeah, I'm gonna say that, because collectively, it's not me, it's us. And us, we're pretty invincible.
We are when we. That's right. That's right. That's right. When we recognize our own power, that is the truth. I mean, wow. When we recognize our power, question is, are we gonna recognize our power?
Yeah,
So
the answer is yes.
yes, and
I'm not accepting no. So if you got no
no,
in your spirit, I'm about to s- get in there and snatch it out of you, because we have no room for no at this point.
no, no question. It really is something when we see what we're capable of and what is regular and natural for us. It's funny because we always come here and we say this for last. For some years, at the beginning, the first time we came to the Nile Valley with a group that we were responsible for was 2008. That was the year after Asa Hilliard made transition. We had been here the year before, and I've been here a couple of times before. 1996 for the first time with the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. And then 2007, and Asa Hilliard made transition on that trip. He was splitting time between us. We were in Aswan, and Jeremiah Wright had a big group, Reverend Wright, in near Cairo at the time, near the pyramids. And but then the following year, organized a trip through Howard with mostly Howard students, but then some elders, including his family, his wife, Mama Patsy Joe, his son-in-law and daughter, and their children. And we came back. That was the first time I came with students, and we would go from Cairo to here, Aswan, and then come back to Luxor. And we did that to time, in part to time our journey with the anniversary of his transition. In that first year, we had a ritual in the Valley of the Kings and Queens, the Valleys of the Rulers, which we did the year before, that after he had made transition, poured libation and did things like that. Anyway, we've now moved from going from the north to the south to the middle to going north, middle, south. And so when we get here, it's very interesting because the farther you go into Egypt, the darker the people get. And so when we checked in last yesterday afternoon, everybody's getting off the buses, we're getting on the ferries, and immediately all these little black boys that could be running the streets in Jersey, Chicago, Detroit, anyway, they're not running the streets. They're literally swimming across the Nile on their little piece of wood. You know, where y'all get these little skateboard size pieces? They're singing songs, they're greeting. Of course, they're working because you give them money. And of course, what the global economy has done to the Egyptian pound is criminal. Right now, it's $1 to roughly about 48 and 50 Egyptian pounds. So you give somebody $1 and it's just transformative. And it's fascinating how we think about joy and happiness in this society. Jobs like working in hotels, jobs in the service economy, tourism, of course, is huge here. In many ways, are considered prestige jobs in the Egyptian economy. And as African people from the United States, we can very much identify with that because our great grandparents and grandparents, Pullman porters, who worked at service jobs, so we understand that. And so, but anyway, I said all that to say this in terms of what we're capable of. We come into this hotel, the staff is overwhelmingly Nubian. They say, okay, we're going to eat, we're going to relax, and then we'll get together and talk about what we're going to do the next day, and then we'll get up in the morning. Well, when you walk into the restaurant, the wait staff is Nubian, the chefs are Nubian, the manager of the restaurant is Nubian, and you see all these cats, and the food is unbelievable. All fresh fruit and juices. People are just like, "Can I eat that? Yeah, you can have it." And like, hold on, y'all gonna eat all this food and go sleep? We got a 5:30 wake up call in the morning. We gotta be out. I started to say that and we're gonna talk about Black excellence. This is just excellence. It's excellence and African
So
people.
the overlap. This is why I know we're in a time, right? We had a similar experience in Kiowa, of course, right? Last
Yes.
time we came with the staff with all of that, but there was we had a breakout session with Sun Michaud and I tapped Larry Daniel Favors
Yes.
because
Yes.
Daniel Black had to leave because he's going to Ghana.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
he would normally, be there for our luncheon, but she tapped in and we had a Q&A afterwards. And every question centered whiteness. Like, what are we going to do about racism? What are we going to do if they do this, and it was Laurie and Dr. Sun Michaud was like, are y'all listening? Like, that's irrelevant, right? It's what are we going to do? Like centering us. So to your point, you're in a space where you don't have to think about being Black because everybody is,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
so it's like going to Ghana. I was talking with Dr. Nana Yao, who was with us, who came with you last week. A lot of people from the buses. They actually took pictures. What's his name? Sweets was
Yes.
there,
Yes.
and
Sweet
his
from
wife.
Brooklyn. No question.
Brooklyn was there. But there were about 5 people on the bus that Sweets was on, and then Dr. Nana Yao was on the red bus, I think, and the blue bus, and they all
Yeah.
were there at Healthy Wealthy Wise. So there's that crossover. But
Yeah.
he was saying, Dr. Nana Yao and Michelle Yaboa, they're from Ghana, and they bring
Yes.
their daughters there every year. And when they come back, the little ones are like sad because it's like to spend your 2 weeks and never have to navigate bigotry and all of that, and then to come back into the States and it's like, oh, here are these people, and the little girls were like, Daddy, why can't it be like that here? And it's a good question. It's
Mhm.
a good question.
An important question. So important. And yeah, brother, I had the Nubia chat pulled up. I see Sweets over here, Curtis Odom, Baba Curtis, Baba Sweets. The 10 folks from Kemet 23 were in attendance at Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise, like home again. So yeah, that cross, that overlap, that connection is critical, and it can be that way. It can be that way all the time. Greg, I see you in the chat, Mosby, in Nubia, and yes, in addition to Imad and Abdul, who live in these neighborhood Nubians. We have Brother Muhammad, one of our guides, and Brother Ahmad. So those are the 4 we have. We took it back to go forward a little bit. We have just a little over 100 folks here this year, which is about half of what we had last year. but we sat with the general manager of the Sinesta St. George. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, the exact same scenario. We had about
Yeah,
235 in January, about, half, and Dr. Black was like, are there more people here this time? And I said, no, it's about 100 less. And he said,
yeah.
no, no way, like, no way. And we both came to this conclusion that two little fish and five loaves, it was like, wow. And somebody said, it seemed like it was 1,000 of us on the beach, but it was fewer people this time than that time. So I don't know if you had that experience too, where even though you had a pared back group, did it still feel as plentiful?
It did, and it does. It does, and that's what makes it interesting. In some ways, we are making a transition. We're obviously all of life is a series of transitions, and then we make the ultimate transition, which is one of the reasons why studying uh, Africa in general and classical Africa, ancient Africa in particular, is so fruitful. African people being the first humans on the planet with the longest memory. When we reclaim it, we get to see how human beings grapple with this question of being intentional in thinking about life, and thinking about existence, and thinking about the why and what of existence. And of course, death is a part of life. And in social structure narratives on Kemet or Egypt, ancient Egypt, there's often this erroneous description of the Egyptians as being, quote, obsessed with death. Well, that awful day will surely come. And it's funny, we were going through the Nile Valley. Nile Valley. We're going through the Nile Valley. We were going through the Valley of the Rulers. These are tombs which were uncovered and discovered over the last century, century and a half, more closer to a century, really, of Egyptian pharaohs from the so-called New Kingdom. The New Kingdom is a kingdom that we find very fascinating. Most people know the New Kingdom not by the phrase or the name, but by the most famous ruler of the New Kingdom, which ironically is very interesting because he is also one of the shortest, had one of the shortest reigns, and was one of the least impactful pharaohs. The reason we know him is because his little tomb in 1922 was stumbled upon by a British Egyptologist, Howard Carr. Was actually stumbled upon by the workers. Most of the stuff's never discovered by the people it's named for. And of course, that would be a young man, a teenager, whose name translates as the living reflection of God, or the living reflection of Emun. And that, of course, would be King Tutankhamun, or Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Tut meaning reflection, Ankh meaning life, and Amun meaning God, or the God Amun. And so his tomb is there. We saw Tutankhamun's Tut. He's actually his Sahu, his body, his Sahu, or what we call mummy in European language, is in the tomb. But at any rate, we went into probably the most striking tomb in the Valley of Night. These are New Kingdom rulers. New Kingdom rulers take you from around 1550 BC to around 1069 BC. So almost a 500-year period. If you can imagine that. Take the United States, double the history of the United States from the time somebody said, no, let's not do that. Take 2024, go back 500 years to 1524, and the Spanish barely got a toenail of one toe around South, not far from where y'all were in South Carolina. And in fact, 1524. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, let me amend that. They're not in South Carolina. That's going to be 1528. So about 4 years from the Spanish being in there, and then they're messing around in Florida the decade before. So that's the whole period of European colonialism, in other words. But that's just one period in Kemetic history. And that period, New Kingdom, we know that period because it was a period which started with pharaohs who were not part of the um, the royal bloodline. The 18th dynasty was part of it. You're talking about Amhos. We went and saw the body of Amhos, the so-called mummy, the Sahu of Amhos. He's actually, Amos is, that is, in Luxor, which we left yesterday. We went to the Luxor Museum and saw him And anyway, I'm gonna get too detailed into that. Maybe I'll talk about more of that in a minute. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because in the Valley of the Rulers, those are tombs from the so-called New Kingdom, which saw the rise of military generals. A lot of drama in African memory, and Egypt is no exception. So in Kemet, you had a dynasty of rulers that come into power who are not in the bloodline, led by Ramses the First, who's Saku. We think we saw in Luxor. There's a so-called mummy that spent years in like this carnival in like Buffalo, New York, and then was acquired by an institution in Atlanta, and then finally the Egyptians were able to get that body back. And while it is not absolutely certain it's Ramses the First, most consensus by scholars is it's probably Ramses the First. So we saw him that, and then, so Ramses the First, and then you have after Ramses the First, you have this succession of rulers who are military. Ramses the First, military man. His kind of chief of staff, chief lieutenant, becomes pharaoh after him. Seti the First, who is fascinating. Seti began building, and then his son Ramses the Second, who is another very well known pharaoh. These are all military guys who did not come into the bloodline, but who took over the country. And then, of course, after that, you get a series of other rulers. But I'm bringing it all up to say that their bodies we still know where they are. And, when we talked about this the night before, we went to the Cairo Museum, and then to the Grand Egyptian Museum, and then to the Museum of Egyptian Civilization, all in the Cairo Giza area, because, a lot of people feel some kind of way about looking at people's bodies centuries, in this case, millennia after they have made transition. You're talking about people who were alive roughly in around 1500 BCE. That's 3,500 years ago. And their bodies are not only above ground, but on display. So there are people, and I'm one of those people who feel some kind of way about going in there and looking into the faces and at the bodies of these African people. And so, there are things we do. We say a prayer, we're quiet as we go in, and then they're curated in a way we have to be very respectful. I'm always making connections, thinking about connections. And while the body of Emmett Till has been recommitted to the earth, the coffin in which his body rested for decades, is on display at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I'll never forget when I was, blessed to write a small article on the opening of that museum for Ebony Magazine, in one of the last print issues of the magazine. I wrote about the museum, and I said, in many ways, that is a spirit center of that museum. The coffin, the little room in the museum where the coffin of Emmett Till is. And when you go into that room, though they haven't been curated as such, this is not part of their training, the women and men who serve as security, as the guards in the museum, treat that room like they're ushers. And you come in the room, it's very quiet. You hear Mahalia Jackson singing, and people come in. I usually sit there. If I come in, I'll sit on the little bench and just watch people, be very respectful of that room. And I often think about that when I come into the museum, the new Museum of Egyptian Civilization, beautifully curated museum in Cairo. When we go into that mummy room, and you see Hatshepsut, you see Seti the First, you see Ramses the Second, you see Queen T, the great royal comrade, companion, wife of Amenhotep III. This T is a diplomat in far antiquity in that new kingdom. T and her husband Amenhotep III are the parents of, not in T's case, not biological, but they're the parents of Akhenaten, Amenhotep the Fourth, who changed his name to Akhenaten and built a whole city in the desert, Tel El Armana, because he wanted to shift the way of knowing in the Nile Valley toward an emphasis on Aten, the manifestation of the divine of God that they would call Aten. Well, it only lasted with Akhenaten, because by the way, Akhenaten is probably better known outside of Egyptology and those who kind of studied the Nile Valley a little bit by his primary wife, and that would be Nefertiti. And then after Akhenaten comes the son, Tutankhamun. He was born as Tutankhaten, thinking that he was going to carry on his father's attempt to shift the whole country through the lens of one man toward another emphasis on the Necheru, on the way of knowing. Unfortunately, in the social structure, they would say that that Akhenaten was the first monotheist in history. That is absurd. The Egyptians always believed in one creative force and power. They just named all the different manifestations of it. Very important to make that emphasis. So we talk about gods, but that's probably, it's kind of misleading. But anyway, I bring all that up to say that Seti the First and Hatshepsut later on, Jehudimos the Third or Tutmosis the Third, Tutankhamun, others, all these 18th and 19th dynasty. 18th and 19th dynasty rulers. So again, around the 1550s, coming forward almost 500 years toward where we are now. Those, which means the new kingdom kind of ends 1,000 years, 1,000 years before the name Jesus Christ is ever heard. It's very interesting how we look at time differently when we talk about being African people in the world, even with just our memory. Forget the existence of the species, just the recent living memory takes us back millennia. We're not talking about Europe. There's no Europe at this time. Talk about race. There's certainly no race. Egyptians wouldn't have talked about race. It would have been absurd for them to talk about race. But at any rate, going through that valley yesterday in Luxor, in that searing heat, is hot. It gets hot the further south you go, but it's very interesting.
Describe how hot. Describe it in juxtaposition to what we're experiencing in the United States.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Very, very succinctly, it's so hot the Egyptians say it's hot. So, we're in Africa. We're not near the equator, but we are in the desert. The Nile this splits Kemet, and most people live near the Nile. And then you go too far to the west, the Libyan desert, or going forward, you go too far to the east, going toward the Red Sea, and ain't nothing but hot, white hot blast in the sand. Anytime people who live in that tell you it's hot, it is hot. We got here in Aswan a couple of days after they've been having a lot of rain here, which we usually don't see in August. It's not the season where you see rain here. They don't really have an infrastructure that deals with rain that well. The road to Abu Simbel, which is where we'll be going in a couple of days, near the border of Sudan. That's where the big temple of Ramses II is. Ramses II and the temple next to it for Nefertari, his primary companion, consort, wife. It's so hot there at this point that it isn't the kind of heat where we have in the United States where you'll see like the waves rising up off of the sand, because the humidity here is very low. In fact, it's really the only way you can tolerate it.
It's like Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So Las Vegas, if you're in the cities, if you're out in the desert, yes, Nevada, New Mexico. I think we topped out yesterday at about 107. So even the wind is hot. And when you put that in the context of complete desert, no foliage, not even the cacti or sagebrush or anything you might see in New Mexico or Nevada driving through the desert. No, ain't none of that. It's just sand. It's just limestone. It's just granite. It's just outcroppings. And when you go into the Valley of the Rulers, and I'm going like this because you come through a mountain. In fact, you go around the other side of the mountain. That's where you see the beautiful mortuary temple of the great pharaoh Hatshepsut, the sister who ruled and who in ruling blocked the man who would follow her, who by different accounts could have been a half sibling, could have been a son, but they're not ever sure. It's Jehudimos III, Tutmosis III, one of the great warrior soldiers of far antiquity. Some people refer to him as the Napoleon of far antiquity. They would do that in the social structure, being silly, kind of silly-minded. Same facts, different interpretation, depending on what your intent is. But Jehudimos predates Napoleon by millennia. So in some ways, if you want to call Napoleon the Jehudimos III of recent history, you could do that if you want. But at any rate, when you come through those cliffs and get to that valley, it's nothing but sand. And it's so hot, in fact, with this sun beaming down, which is why we have these wake-up calls 4 in the morning and get out of here as the sun is coming up so we can hit these sites and get in these places before the white hot heat of the noonday sun gets going. Still, it's so hot that you can feel the heat in the sand you're walking on or on the pavement you're walking on for the places that are paved as we're coming into these spaces. You can feel it in the soles of your feet, even though you got on shoes, because it's hotter on the ground, as we all know, and you ain't spending time around any concrete. You see. But as we're going into the tombs yesterday, and this happens a lot for me, always thinking about connections, movement and memory. How do we move through time and space, and how did Africans make sense of these experiences? So we're walking through tombs that are carefully constructed and built by a brilliant workforce. In fact, we spend time at the village where the workers who built these tombs, who painted these tombs, who wrote the metanetra, the hieroglyphs on the tombs, first in black, they sketched out, and then in red as the editors come in and correct the metanetra. And then the carvers come in, either bas relief or flat relief. Bas relief meaning you've carved in a way so that the images in the metanetra jump out of the wall at you in 3 dimension, or you carve into the stone, as Maurice White would say, one of the many who have been inspired by the people of Kemet, the Earth, Wind, and Fire, of course, starting life in part as the Pharaohs out of Chicago. I mean, so all those album covers, all those liner notes, all those songs, when he's talking about it's written in the stone, it's because he's concentrating on what happened here. We went to the workers' village, a place that the Arabs call Deir Medina, but that the people who lived there and did the work on the tombs and who did the metanetra and did that work called Set Ma'at, the place of Ma'at, Set Ma'at. We talked about the fact, in fact, that, of course, when they felt they were being abused by the government, they hadn't been compensated. They were very concerned about not only their compensation, but their families' well-being. They went on strike. The first recorded strike in world history took place here in the Nile Valley. It's black on black conversation. Like, hey man, we're not making no more tombs till you get this straight. And of course they had to get it straight because their skill level was so high. We don't know how many people could read or write in Kemet. So when you read books and they say, the elite were literate and nobody else, don't do that. Nah, don't do that. All the evidence we have is the opposite, that people could read and write. These are Africans. Well, African people are oral and European history is written. Don't do that. Set that aside because it's inaccurate. You open your mouth and show them the inadequacies of the education that you received. But we can do something about that. That's why we're here. Also, by the time the Greeks and the Romans come in, that is a period that takes place a lot later. So by the time you get to the so-called Ptolemaic period, the period of the Greeks, this is around the time of Alexander of Macedon, about 332 BC. So 3 centuries before Christ, still a long time before Christ, but nothing like the Pyramid Age, which is like 2700, 2600, 2500 BCE. So about 2,000 years after the pyramids are built is when Alexander comes stumbling his ass into the Nile Valley. And of course he dies, and you get a few more Ptolemies. You get this whole thing. They go for, roughly speaking, about 300 years before the Romans take over. And of course, what do we know of this period? Besides the distortions, probably the only name most people know from the Ptolemaic period is the 7th queen to take this name. That would be queen, minor queen in Kemetic history, but major in terms of Europeans trying to insert themselves into the narrative. And she was not European, but she wasn't Egyptian either. And that would be Cleopatra the 7th, who of course had a son, Caesarion, who took over after her death. Difficult birth, by the way. Caesarean is where we get C-section from, Caesarean section. But that is the transition from the Greeks to the Romans. So you can watch Elizabeth Taylor or read Shakespeare, Anthony and Cleopatra, or whatever, but ain't none of that. That's that. By the time Egypt's old and tired. So I'm gonna bring all that up to say that late period, that Greek period, during that period, the Ptolemies, the Greeks who come in to call themselves running Egypt, even though they would not live in the regions of Egypt that we visit. Too high. They ain't coming that deep into the country. They want to rule from Greece. So they want to rule from the Mediterranean city, which they create to govern their territory, or what they claim to be their territory, Alexandria. That's where Alexandria comes from, the city on the Mediterranean Sea. But they're always complaining because the people of Kemet ain't just going along. Like, oh, we're oppressed now, you oppressed us, we just gonna go along and do what you say. No, they're always rebelling. In fact, it got so bad that under Ptolemaic rule, the Greeks were like, look, these people keep rebelling against us. We can't put down all the rebellions. It's more of them than us. But they say, leave us alone to practice our ways of knowing. And, y'all can do what y'all want because you never come down here bothering us anyway. A very interesting striking parallel, I think, in terms of even contemporary government. When people say, well, I don't care who the president is, my life stays the same. You have to step back and look because that's not true in terms of policy. But then there are elements of it that resonate because if you've never been to Washington, D.C., if you've never been to the administrative capital of your state, to the state capital, if you live in the state capital, or if you live in Washington, D.C., but your daily life and what appears to be going on in terms of policymaking seem a million miles apart, then it can certainly resonate for you to be in a land like this in ancient times when the Greeks said, we're running things. Because I don't know you. You ain't familiar. I don't care who shot you. They ain't kill you. But it's like you don't even know what's going on in the administrative capitals. But the Greeks realized that part of the way they could kind of make peace with these indigenous people would be to let them do what they do. Again, in stark contrast to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, who get mercilessly attacked, and they try to convert these people, including us, Africans who are captives as well, into a culture that we didn't create. In the case of Egyptian culture, the Egyptians never took on anyone else's culture. I'm gonna say some more about that in a minute. In fact, let me just mention this now because I've been hunting books. I've been in the bookstores in Cairo, the bookstores in Luxor. My man Abuti's grandson. Abuti was one of the first indigenous tour guides in the country. We talked about him last year when I was here. His grandson runs one of the two shops, Abuti's bookstore in Luxor. So went by the principal Booties and then went by Booties and had a delicious cup of mint. They got this lemon mint drink, which is so delicious. He sat there and drank the lemon mint drink and had a conversation. Beautiful thing with the young brother. I love this brother, man. He's a beautiful spirit. And the thing about it is about people, even though we only see them once a year, they remember you. So at any rate, in one of the Abuti bookstores, I picked this book up, which was I'm embarrassed to tell you how much this book cost. Even at half price, they had it on sale, so I got it from the bookstore manager. But I needed this. It's called, if you can see here, the light's a little different here. Hellenizing Art in Ancient Nubia, 300 BC to AD 250, and its Egyptian models. A study in, quote, acculturation. Very interesting. This is a 550-year period. Again, that would be the period of colonization. We wouldn't be speaking no damn English, you understand, in the Western Hemisphere. English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, or Dutch, none of those languages. But this is a very interesting book. Laszlo Torak has written. The reason I picked this up, he is actually Hungarian. And he works well, I won't get into his pedigree, he's Egyptologist. But I bought this book because it talks about how, as the Greeks penetrated inner Africa with their culture, they tried to Hellenize art in some places. By Hellenize, Elas is a name Greek. We say Greek, they would have said Elas, with the H being silent, Hellas, Elas. But it's very interesting when you talk about Hellenizing, you're talking about Greek influences. And what Laszlo Tarak says is very interesting. He says, and I'll just read a little bit from the summary. He says, let me see if I can find. The author begins with a history of Nubia in art. So where we are now in Aswan, going further south up the Nile, Nubia, in other words. He begins with a history of Nubian art and a critical survey of the literature of the Ptolemaic and Roman Egyptian art. So the Ptolemies are the Greeks, followed by the Romans, who have almost nothing to do with the Egyptians. The Romans look at the Egyptians like contemporary Western settler colonial societies like the United States look at the indigenous people. We ain't doing nothing. We don't even recognize y'all. But the Egyptians, of course, that contempt was mutual. And so he's looking at these two things. Special chapters are then devoted to the discussion of the Egyptian-Greek interaction in the arts of Ptolemaic Egypt, the place of Egyptian Hellenistic and Hellenizing art within the Wakemene, the pluralistic visual world of Ptolemaic and Roman Egypt, as well as on the specific genre of terracotta sculpture. Very interesting. But here's why about this book. Utilizing examples from Merowe City and Musawara, Esufla, These are cities that are now going to be in the Sudan. We out of Egypt. So the Greeks are coming in these places. And he goes on to say, the author argues that cultural transfer from Ptolemaic Greek and Roman Egypt to Nubia resulted in an inward focused adaptation. Therefore, the resulting Nubian art from this period expresses only those aspects of Egyptian and Greek art that are compatible with indigenous Nubian goals, intent. So here's why I bought this book. The idea is when the Greeks and the Romans come into Nubia, come into these African spaces, come into the Nile Valley, come into Egypt, Egyptians and the Nubians are cousins. Check out the tomb of Ramses III, which we did, where we take photographs of something called the Table of Nations, where you see the Egyptians portray themselves, and you see these dark-skinned people with leopard print clothing on and in the same dress, and then you see this, what we might call the Semitic groups, clearly portrayed, different color, different clothing, different look. And then the next of the three that you see is Africans from the rest of Africa. We know that the Egyptians are looking at themselves in the first figure because you see Remech. That's one of the words people they use for themselves. People, they didn't call themselves black people as such. They said Remech, the people. The third character, Africans from the rest of Africa, Nubia, other places. These Africans are dressed the same as the Egyptians and in the same color. And then you see another figure, which has been labeled Indo-European. They too look different, dress different. So you see, how the Egyptians look at themselves? You say, it's very interesting. You see this. This is in the tomb. One of the places it is in the tomb of Ramses III. There are other places it's in, including Seti I, but the one in Ramses III is the one that we even generally talk about. That is in the Valley of the Kings and Queens as well. But as I said, the reason I brought that is because when the Greeks and the Romans come into Africa, come into the Nile Valley, the Africans, generally, the Nubians in particular for this book, do not become Greek, do not become Roman in cultural meaning making, in movement and memory, in ways of knowing. They don't adopt these foreign cultures. Anything from those foreign cultures they bring into their cultural sphere, into their meaning making, they only do it if it's consistent with what they do. And again, making these connections, thinking about that in terms of African people, we see this consistently among African people. People say, well, y'all not Africans, y'all Americans. Okay, y'all taught us English and we created Ebonics. Y'all taught us, gave us some of these musical instruments that we didn't bring. We brought some musical instruments and we took all them instruments and brought them into our cultural meaning making. And then the other side of the coin is, when you hear us doing what we do, you come to us. We don't come to you. Egypt never adopted culture of the Greeks, the culture of the Romans. Conversely, when Greece and Rome and other people, the Assyrians, the Hittites, the Amu, known as the Hyksos, whatever, they come into the Nile Valley, they absorb the Egyptian culture into theirs and then leave becoming Africanized, become Egyptian, kind of Egyptianized, if you want to use that. Of course, the most striking example in terms of ways of knowing are the Abrahamic faith traditions. Remember, if you know your Bible, and I know you do, Prof, you know it better than I do. When you go to the Old Testament, you see all this time that these people spend in Africa and in territories adjacent to Africa, and they become Africanized. When Moses goes up that mountain and comes down with the 10 Commandments, he went up there with the knowledge that there are 42 declarations of innocence, which are attached to the Neteru Ma'at. And he comes back down, and of those 10, the only one you don't find in some form in the 42 is the first one, which says you shouldn't have any gods before me, which is almost like saying, I'm going to pretend. You know.
And where was Jesus? Where was 12-year-old Jesus?
Well, that's the question. Where is he from 12 to 33?
We ain't see him for a while. Where did he get lost? Where the family? Where was that, Dr. Carr?
Well, Professor Hunter, this is the thing, right?
Because to your point, if it was like Socrates had to drink that hemlock because it was foreign, where was he? Right? What Jesus was teaching was also foreign to the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Where did he get that?
Where did he get it? That's exactly right. And in that, I'm glad you raised that and make that very important observation, because we had a very interesting conversation. We were in Cairo. This is maybe the second night we were here. We got a lot of ministers on this trip. Reverend Dina Wingard, who was a staple. And listen, y'all Nubians who are up like I am here in this hotel, in this space, and a lot of Nubians are here in office hours who were probably here with us. Just know that, we all up together. Um, got a lot of ministers. Reverend Letty is here, of course. Letty Al Rahman, who is always, in office hours, always in Nubia, always commenting. She's here. We got into this whole conversation about religion and spirituality. That can often be a fight, but we entered it in a space and from a perspective and with an intent of generosity and love. If you come in with a space of generosity and love, you can have any conversation really, no matter how difficult. And so in the conversation, we were talking about these parallels and these connections. And on the question of Jesus, it can be very difficult for folk whose concept of Christianity is narrow and exclusive. And by that I mean, we talk about Tefalo Benga, Sister LaChonda, who is his assistant, who is his kind of left and right hands in San Francisco. It's the first time I've had a chance to spend some time with her, because when he left the East Coast in Philly, where we were, and went to Africa back home to do work, and then left Africa and came back to the United States in San Francisco, LaChonda took the baton from us. We had him on lock in Philly, and then he went to San Francisco. So this is the first time we've all been together in one place, like the Obenga Alumni Society. So China and I were walking for a long time today in the temple at Kamombo, just comparing notes on how severe that man was on both of us and how we were grateful and are grateful for it. And so at any rate, Obenga used to talk about knowledge by faith, knowledge by reason, knowledge by opinion. He said knowledge by fact or reason, those are facts. You don't debate. You can debate those. You can discuss those. You can have different perspectives on them. But one thing doesn't change, is the thing that happened. This is the thing as it is. This is the material thing. Knowledge by opinion, you can take those facts and have your own debate and discussion about how you emphasize things, what you prefer, what you don't prefer, that kind of thing. He says, but knowledge by faith, you don't argue faith, because there's no way to have an external kind of barometer for people's experiences. And so, when people say Jesus, I understand. I don't understand why is this human being got a bird head, and why is this guy? It's not a human being. That bird is symbolic. Okay, I don't know about it. All I know is I'm gonna call the name of Jesus. All right, hey, go with God. If you believe in God, don't go with God. If you don't believe in God, that's faith. That's not about faith. You don't argue. And so when you come in with a spirit of generosity, in that conversation, we got into this discussion that we have every time we come to the Nile Valley on the origins of the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. The fact is, the incontrovertible fact is, the roots are here. The opinion on which is better or worse, or which one that's going to be shaped by your experiences. Egypt is predominantly a Muslim country. And I'm telling you, it's very striking to be in a country where they would smoke the hell out of some cigarettes. These people not smoking hotels is like a suggestion in some parts of the country. Our sister Courtney Wilkinson, principal of Roseville High School, is here. Of course, she and her partner, and it's just a beautiful thing because they're in Nubia and they're in office hours all the time. And they gotta, we need a room that's non-smoking. Well, okay, well, we got to make sure that happens, because you gonna be in some rooms in here. We think, is somebody smoking in here? No, they already smoked in here. But at the same time, no alcohol. At the same time, of the 5 pillars of Islam, my God, the 5 pillars of Islam, just like Christians, just like Muslims, anywhere in the world, just like Jews, just like people, if you believe in your faith and you live according to it in certain ways, you will see it throughout the society. There is no welfare system in Egypt. And as we were talking with Abdul about this, Abdul was saying, there's no welfare system here. You know why? It's a Muslim country, and we don't need a welfare system. Nobody in this country will starve. You will see people who you say, well, these people must be poor. You say, yes, they don't have material resources. People waiting tables, people in these restaurants, people cleaning up, people who make your bed, and that kind of thing. We always are mindful of being very kind and very, very mindful of what these people do and how they do it, because they don't have a lot of material resources. He said, but no one will starve here, because one of the 5 pillars of Islam is charity. And so if somebody is hungry, you feed them. If you have to give 2.5% of your wealth, of your income, of what you have materially to the poor, and you start with your family and community, you then continue to go on to strangers. He said, I don't care if you're a Christian, Muslim, if you don't believe in God, it is my duty as a Muslim to give you this. Now, this isn't every Muslim in the world, just like it ain't every Christian in the world. But to see a country where you saying, well, so how do y'all do? And it was so funny in these conversations we're having. Somebody said, we were talking the other day, and somebody said, well, how do y'all deal with Social Security and welfare? So we don't have that. What you mean? You don't have welfare? You don't have public assistance? No. Why? Because people don't let people starve. Well, of course, that's idealized. Somebody has starved in this country. Yeah, but the attitude is different. It's very interesting. So anyway, I set out to get to the point. You raised the question of, how we think about Jesus in that context and in the context of the conversation we're having here and in terms of origins. Well, Jesus Christ living humbly, never paid rent, a utility bill, didn't go out to restaurants, somehow lived off of the people, lived with the people, and vice versa. As a narrative of faith, when you start trying to line that up factually, you begin to see whether these things happened or not. What is clear is the material record reveals the influences. So we're in a place called Abydos. Abydos is one of the ancient centers of Kemetic governance, how they viewed themselves, how they unified. It is at Abydos, Abydos. Some people prefer to pronounce it Abydos. The ancient name Abdu. This is a place of origins. This is where the first rulers that we have any attestation to, Jer, Narmer, Menes, you see their names. This is like Dynasty Zero, before there's a dynasty, so to speak. So we're talking about, roughly speaking, maybe 3,300 years ago, which is like 500 to 700 years before there are pyramids. See, this is the thing. We start talking about African people. Sheikh Anta Diop, the great Senegalese scholar, once said this. When you study world history, when you study African people in particular as an African, it gives you the serenity to accept the facts as they are. You ain't trying to prove nothing to nobody. You ain't trying to talk about black excellence. I mean, everybody calm down. We are talking about deep time, not even deep time in the scholarly sense, because that would go back millennia and millions of years, even in terms of planetary and cosmic history. We're talking about in terms of human experiences that have been recorded after people have recorded this stuff. So we're in Abydos, Abdu. I love that, going to that place, because it is ancient. The people of Kemet, the first rulers who unified the country, who brought together Upper and Lower Kemet, the South and the North, they wanted to have what they call cenotaphs or stela or markers that represent almost like tombstones in that area of Abydos, even if they weren't buried there, because it was like the spiritual center. It's where they came together with a concept. Let's have a country that unites the geography along the Nile. Let's create a country. So you see them coming together, Narber, Aha, Menes, Jer, and these folk before their dynasties, coming into these dynasties. And so there's this beautiful, beautiful temple begun by Seti I, again, a military man. His father, Ramses I, the beginning of the 19th dynasty in Kemet, around 1500 or so BCE, before the Common Era, or BC, if you want to say before Christ, fine. Well, this temple, Abydos, which represents the larger area of Abydos, the town and all of this, one of its names is the Mansion of Millions of Years. Millions? How you Egyptians know about millions? Oh yeah, they got this sycamore tree. When you see it carved in the glyphs, and you see the pharaoh in front of it, and then you'll see sometimes a netcher, one of the spirit forces, carving the name of the pharaoh into the leaves on the sycamore tree. Sycamore trees can live up to maybe even more than 1,000 years. So they use this tree to symbolize eternity. And Abydos, or the mansion of millions of years, and of course there are other buildings that have that name as well, but I think about Abydos, it's beautifully carved. They got 7 chapels, and by chapel I'm using that word intentionally, within the second hypostyle hall, beyond the second hypostyle hall. So you got a building that was built in front of it by Ramses II, the son of Seti I. It's not there anymore. Then you go up the steps and you go into this first hall, and you see all of these netcheru. It's so beautifully carved that, all of these spirit forces that are carved. And then you go beyond that, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chapels, each one dedicated to the veneration of a different dimension of the divine or God. So you got one for Aset, Asar, and Heru, Isis, Osiris, and Isis, Osiris, and Horus. There's 3 of those. Then you have one for Seti. That's the seventh. That's the guy who transitions and joins in there. You've got one for Ptah of Memphis, Mennefer, which was the capital. We went to Mennefer. That's nearer Cairo. So you got Ptah there. You've got Sokar there. These are the chapels. I mean, you go into the chapel, one of the chapels. I think this is one dedicated to Wasir, to Asar. You see, talking about Jesus Christ, you see this figure, Asar, laying on his back, looking up at the ceiling. At his head and at his feet are Heru the elder, Horus the elder, and Aset or Isis. He has been killed by his brother Setek, and they're preparing his body, the mummification process. So Heru the elder is like Horus. Horus always existed in the Neteru realm. He's in the land of the ancestors. He's in the land of the spirit forces. So that's why they call him Horus the elder. He's always been there. Then you have Aset. Aset is the wife of Osiris or Asar. She is the partner, the companion. She is the sister. All relationships between women and men represented in Aset. She has a sister, Nebet. She has a brother, Setek. He has a sister, Nebet. He has a brother, Setek. It's four of them: Isis, Osiris, Set, and Nephthys, to use the Greek terms. Well, Set killed his brother, the beef, Upper and Lower Egypt. Stories about it. Anyway, he's dead. He's not coming back. But on his back, when you see Horus, the elder, that means you know he's in the spirit side. He ain't in the living side. And you see his wife, and they're there on either on head to foot, and in the middle he's laying there, and he's got his hand, and he is masturbating. Why is he masturbating in the spirit world? He died before they could procreate. Very important. And Brother Benachi Montgomery, one of our elders who was in the association, ASCAC, who was traveling with us now, Baba Benachi reminded us the other night that when you look at the word in the Meta Netre for masturbate, it is a feminine word. Other times in feminine words will have a T at the end. He says in some ways, even the concept that they would use, they wouldn't say masturbation, that self-stimulation process, the word for it has a female ending at the T. Now, he speculates as to what that may or may not mean. But on that side, you see them doing that. On the other side of the wall in this little chapel, you see the same scene. And he's laying there like this, but he's not masturbating. You don't see his other hand. What you see hovering over the region where his penis will be, what you see is a falcon, a little falcon over his region. So when you look at that one on one side, you look at this one on the other side, you see the masturbation, meaning producing this seed that commingles with an egg to create a child. And over here, you see the falcon hovering over his nether region. And what it signifies when you read the glyphs is that's Isis. But the falcon, see, this is African people. Now this is Seti the First. Seti the First is New Kingdom. Seti the First was a pharaoh who emerges in the New Kingdom as a pharaoh around 1290s BCE. That's very important. So this is going to be, what am I saying now? 3,000, maybe 3,200 years ago, almost 3,300 years ago, almost 3,300 years ago. So before Christ, 1,003 years before there's a Jesus Christ, you have a story, an allegory, a narrative of faith, if you want to call it that, where the woman and the man don't get a chance to have a child before the man is killed. The woman then, creating a spirit self in the ancestral world, hovers over her husband's nether region, and they procreate. It's a falcon, though. The falcon is not the symbol of Aset or Isis. The falcon is the symbol of Horus, not Horus the Elder. Horus the Elder has always existed. Horus the Younger, Horus the Son, because they're going to have a child named Horus or Heru. But in that hovering, it's like, okay, we don't have television, we don't have movies, we don't have digital media, we don't have producers, we don't have sound stages like Tyler Perry Soundstage in Atlanta. We don't have any of the ways to dumb this down in a way to make moving images. We got to tell this story in stone. So we're going to have her as a spirit figure in the form of her son with him, and they're going to hover. Well, to make a long story short, we can talk about this difference another time in terms of how they use the story to explain the calendar. Their 10-month count, their 12-month calendar of 30 days each. There's a whole connection there. We've talked about this in office hours. We've talked about it here, but I won't go into it tonight. Long story short, they have a child. Isis gets pregnant in the spirit world and gives birth to Horus. Horus is born. Horus avenges his father's murder, not by killing his uncle, but by subduing him. And that's the story on the walls of the Temple of Horus at Edfu, which we read today, earlier, yesterday now, Edfu, where you see Horus battling his uncle. You killed my father. I'm going to avenge my father. But here's the thing. It's a metaphor for individuals and character.
Can
Because,
we
go ahead.
can we talk about time and how everything in this current existence is BCE or BC or AD or common era, but the time that you're talking about, it's like the world we're living in hypocrisy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're saying basically the world didn't start until this period of time, and we all agree. We all agree with it, right? Because this is it's 2024.
Well,
You know?
we agree at an ignorance. If we
Yeah,
knew more, we would say it differently.
but globally, we're all in agreement with something that's absolutely wrong.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Are we though?
Are
Just
we?
because people,
Tell
well,
us.
just because people understand the language you're speaking doesn't mean that that's their language. Because it is absolutely not 2024 in China. Except they're doing business. You want to say 2024? No problem. In fact, Tanya was we were riding this afternoon, and she was asking me had I read a book that she was reading, and she's constantly reading. She's on the bus reading downtown, and she started talking about this whole the whole world of digital currency, the whole world of the cloud and commerce, and how money isn't real. And that's true. I mean, and by that, I mean, it's only propped up by our belief in it. In fact, if you all been following the news, you saw that in Burkina Faso, the folks who took over the government there said that they are now going to create a currency that is pegged to gold. And gold produced in Burkina Faso that will no longer be available to the mining companies who take it out of the country. They said they are now going to peg their currency to gold that is in the ground in their country. And as a result, what is that going to do to the dollar? The dollar's not backed by gold. The dollar's backed by the
Anymore.
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 Anymore. But once you do that, once you delink currency from other kind of value uh, value signifiers, value units, you're playing a dangerous game. Remember a couple of weeks ago, I was telling you I'm reading this book about central banking and how these banks that basically have relationships with each other and can't be regulated by the countries they're in have created this world where they're beyond the capacity to regulate. They can just make it up. And that's what they're doing. If you all been watching the news, financial, I'm looking like I had a physical copy, I had to read online, but this muscle memory. The Financial Times talking this week about the stock market. We've been seeing how it went up, it went down. A lot of this stuff is political. They're trading bets on who's going to win these elections, on where the volatility is in the world. And I'm saying all that to say this. In China, they're going to use 2024 when they're doing business with people in the world. But that absolutely does not mean that that's the date on their calendar. It just means that they know how to be multilingual. In some countries, like the United States, we're monolingual. We only speak the language of 2024. We only speak the language of capitalism and democracy, so to speak, which is absolutely absurd. But it works for us until it doesn't, which is why the more you know about what's going on in the world, the better you will be prepared for what's going to go on in the world. Because even here with the wait staff or folks cutting the grass, and we were at the American University of Cairo, we went by the bookstore there. I stopped because I seen this brother cutting grass. I'm like, man, I wish man, let me have that more. I'm gonna push a row of grass. I see you out here. He didn't speak a word of English, so by the time he figured out what I was saying, he had turned the mower off, and he just started laughing because I respect the man that can cut the grass in 107-degree weather. Anyway, but when you stop and talk with people, if you can get past the language, you find out these people are keeping tabs of world affairs. They know what's going on, including in the United States, including among African people who have been assaulted in the United States. Every time we've come here, I don't care whether it's Sandra Bland or George Floyd, I don't care whether it's Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery, I don't care. They know the names of these people. Now, if you turn around and say, what's going on in Egypt? To an average American from the United States, most people from the United States become aware of something going on globally at only key moments that they find interesting. And of course, I mean, we just saw one. Our sister out of Brazil, one of 7 children out of Sao Paulo, Brazil, Rebecca Andrade, who won the gold medal on the floor exercises. And we saw young Georgia at the Olympics, and we saw young Jordan Childs bow her down, and young Simone Biles do that. Simone Biles getting the silver, Childs getting the bronze, and they bow down to their Afro-Brazilian sister. And when they interviewed Jordan Childs, she would say, it was my idea. It was my idea because that was a black podium, and people don't get recognized the way they should be properly recognized. These 3 sisters, it was a black podium. The first time in the history of Olympic gymnastics, 3 black people, women or men, but of course women, were on the podium at the same time medaling. And in the case of the most decorated gymnast in the history of so-called Latin America, Rebecca Andrade, we see her being celebrated. People say, well, she's the Simone Biles of Latin America. Yeah, Simone Biles, the GOAT, the greatest of all time anywhere, could also be seen in addition to that as the Rebecca Andrade of North America, if you want to put it that way. But that whole question of who we are to each other is there. But people in America, they are now a little bit aware of people other places when the United States sends teams to compete against them in the Olympics. But politically, historically, they don't know very much about that. So in terms of time, the idea that because the West has curated 2024, that everybody in the world uses that dating has to be qualified by saying, yeah, everybody speaks the 2024 language, but the indigenous people aren't using that once you go away. The people of the Asian countries, places like China or Korea, they're not using that. The Muslim world absolutely doesn't use that. When you walk into a mosque, like we did a couple of days ago, one of the oldest mosque on the African continent, one of the oldest in the world, and we were there. It was we walked in just as they were going for the noonday prayer. And one of the brothers on the trip is from Philly. He's a very observant Muslim, great brother. And he walked in, and we all went in, decided the tourists go in, took our shoes off, and went to. This brother walked straight down the middle of the path and went straight in the mosque. Why? Because it was time for noon prayers, and he is a Muslim. And you know what they did? They didn't say, "Oh, you're a tourist." No, they said, "Assalamu alaikum." He walked right in like he was living in Egypt his whole life, made the right where the brothers were, took his shoes off, and made his prayer. I'm saying all that to say that Islam does not come into existence until what the West would call the 7th century. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So in the Islamic calendar, it's nowhere near the year 2000 yet. Instead, they still in the 1400s. So I'm saying, but when it comes time to go to the bank or to put your card in to charge when you buy something or trading, yeah, 2024, no problem. They speak multiple languages. And so even when we think about Christianity, again, to put a bow on that in terms of what I was talking about in terms of Abydos with Seti the First, the tomb, not the tomb, the temple for Seti the First, the 7 chapels, and the one that has the story of Asar. Once you go through it to the back behind the chapels where this scene is, Jesus Christ, who goes back to year 0, year 1 in the Western calendar, which means anything before that is considered before Christ, or even as the United Nations Scientific Education and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, among others, said we need to create a dating system that will recognize that majority of people in the world aren't Christians, or the billions who aren't Christians should be able to speak a common language in addition to just having to say BC and in the year of our Lord in Latin AD. They said we can do 2 things, and they've done that. They say, one, we can say BCE, which doesn't displace the dating system of Christianity, but it says before the common era, before the era of Western expansion, when we all were supposed to get down and lay down to these numbers. So at least you're recognizing politically that dating is arbitrary. That's one thing. Or you can say, whatever the year is now, you can count it backward. And instead of saying 2024 is the year now, and going back, let's say, to 1000 BC, instead of saying 1000 BC, you would say 3024 BP. What's that? That means 30 3,024 years before the present. In other words, dates become political. And what the UN committees and those who follow that dating system are trying to do is say, we can agree that now is now. But how you narrate what came before now, we want to take away some of the political language and the baggage that comes with dates, because dates are political. And we also understand that. Everybody in the United States understands that. If you say 1776 here in Egypt, they'd be like, what? So what's that? What's that? What is 1787 or 1861 to 1865 or 1965 or 1955? Or if you say, okay, well, what is that? What is that? What is that? Because those numbers attach you to cultural meaning making. They are exercises. What a calendar is an exercise in movement and memory. So at any rate, you can suspend that and you can think about our common humanity and coming from cultural perspectives that are different, but that can come together to put together a beautiful concert of human understanding in a place like Abydos, as you've got Christians, like the Christians and Muslims and others who are having this conversation we were having a couple of days ago in Cairo, or my own mother, who at 80 years old, traveled to the Nile Valley with us and stood in that chapel I'm describing to you all and looked at both of those vignettes as we're discussing them and hearing them discussed by the guides. Because in Egypt, the guides discuss, the people who are walking through not supposed to say anything. And we respect that. We're very mindful of that. And then we get back to our sessions and we're on the bus, we have different conversation. But in that space, we respect that. You got to respect the country. Always, and that's a pro tip, always respect the rules of a country. So as she's looking at that, my mother had the same reaction. Didn't shake her for Christianity. It strengthened it for this reason. Well, this isn't Christian. Of course it is. You know what that is? The masturbation from the spirit world, creating the seed, the hovering of the falcon in the form of the child they're going to have, even though it's the woman. That is what could be described in contemporary parlance as an immaculate conception. The point is, the question of virgin birth, that gets narrated and glossed later, much later. And whether it be my mama, whether it be Christians and sitting there and Muslims talking about it in context, whether it be Jeremiah Wright teaching about this through Black liberation theology and taking so many people to Kemet over the decades, many times coming to Kemet and looking at those same walls and have these same conversations. Once you move from narratives of faith to narratives of reason and fact, you understand that there doesn't have to be a contradiction between these things. In fact, one of the things we were talking about the other night, Mario Beatty, Brother Jamal Young, who's here, who really studied Christianity at a depth that was just really on display the other night, is the overlap between the Egyptian belief systems and Christianity, to the point where you see in the early days of what we would call Christianity, in those first couple of centuries, as it emerges, pre-Roman kind of consolidation and Catholicism, and even post-Roman consolidation and Catholicism, is the only way these governments can spread Christianity, after, by the way, trying to stamp it out, shout out to the Romans, y'all know what I'm talking about, is to absorb into their concepts all these other ways that people had of ways of knowing that predate Christianity. So you see Jesus Christ, hand in literal hand, with Horus. They praying to Jesus and Horus for a mother to give a successful birth and to be healthy, for the baby to be healthy. They're praying to Jesus and Horus, the two children of Joseph, Mary, Asar, Aset, for protection. What happened? This is what happens in any society. Just like you drag an evergreen tree into your house, put a white man in a suit on top of it, and put the Star of David of Bethlehem, Star of Bethlehem on the top of the tree, and see no contradiction. This Christmas time, when Jesus was born, okay, what that got to do with that white man, that suit over there, and this Yule log, and this tree? Well, you got to let people come into a space the way they come into it. So that's what I was saying in terms of Christianity. But again, kind of just putting some bows on things and tying them up. The Egyptians did not move their culture when other people came in. The Nubians, as this book attests, did not acculturate to foreign power and foreign culture. They brought elements of foreign culture into their culture to the degree that it fit. And their cultures influenced the cultures that came in the Nile Valley. So much of what we call in Western culture, in terms of the Greeks and the Romans, is Egyptian culture. Much of what we call in Western Abrahamic faith traditions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity are Egyptian concepts that come into those ways of knowing because the Egyptian has the influence. That's one of the reasons, again, why we study it. So it's a question of emphasis. It's a question of intent. What is your intent? And so we ask the question, what is our intent in this day and age? As we've been here, as we finish up the third leg of our annual kind of 3-region journey, starting in Cairo and Giza with the pyramids and the Old Kingdom and the age of construction, which goes back, roughly speaking, 2,700 years or so, Imhotep and all that, to the period when we go into Luxor or Waset, the scepter, the power, where you see the temples, Amun-Ra, you see the politics of the priesthood, which is fascinating. You see a priesthood who has become so powerful in the administrative state that they even trump the Pharaoh, the Pharaoh. And if you bump up against them, as in the case of Akhenaten, and what happens after Akhenaten with the son of Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, who is probably killed. That whole story with Tutankhamun is fascinating because when you get to Tutankhamun, then you get another general, I-A-Y, who's followed by another general, Horemheb. I and Horemheb basically ice Tutankhamun. That's a flattening of the narrative, but the military coup that leads to the beginning of the 19th dynasty with Ramses I, then Seti I, then Ramses II coming all the way through, and all these Ramses, 11 sons of Ramses take the throne. Because this guy has, he's attested to have nearly 100 children. You know, almost half boys, half girls, if you believe the Egyptologists. The tomb of many of them is in the Valley of the Kings and Queens. And as you see this whole thing kind of emerge, you can think in terms of dates, because dates become markers for narratives, and narratives become markers for identity. Or you can think and you can think in terms of concepts, in terms of ways of knowing. So as I'm going through the tomb of Seti I, and I'm looking at these depictions, this beautifully created tomb by these work women and men who lived in Set Ma'at, who went on strike one time when it was like, yeah, bro, yeah, I got to pay us. As I'm going through these tombs of Ramses III, where the Table of Nations is, or Tutankhamun, the boy king, where you see him, his little form there in this little room where all this gold came out of, that is on display at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, the old museum, that is going to be on display at the Grand Egyptian Museum, that has been touring the world all over for decades. As I'm going through and going down into this tomb, in my mind, out of my mind, I'm always got a soundtrack playing in terms of cultural meaning making. And as I'm going down, you go through, it is so quiet, that white hot sand, the wind blowing very gently. And as you get to the entrance of any tomb, you can hear a pin drop outside. And as you're going down, you feel the humidity, and then it gets real cool because you're in that stone and it's quiet. And as you're going down and it's resonant, anything you hum, anything you say bounces off the walls. We were in the great pyramid of Khufu on the Giza plateau, and coming out, we was drenched in sweat. It's hot. We've been in there into the inner chamber of the pyramid. This is where Paul Robeson stood, and Essie Robeson. This is where Louise and Louis Armstrong stood. And as we came out, I just started singing, lift every voice and sing. It's ringing off the stone. Everybody starts singing. Here we are coming out singing, lift every voice and sing. We're going into the tomb of Seti I. The other day in the Valley of Kings and Queens, 107-degree heat, and now it's getting cooler as we're going down, and you're looking at these beautiful vignettes, these incredible vignettes of these figures representing divinities, talking, exchanging with one another, protecting the person who is buried there, like the beautiful chapel. I really can't encourage y'all enough to see the raised bas-relief carvings at Abydos, Abydos. Go get Abydos, go look at it, and find color versions of Abydos. See Asar Set, see Satek, see Heru the Elder, Heru the Younger, see Ptah, see Amun, see the child sitting on the lap of his mother, suckling at her breast, and that mother is Aset, Isis. See the Pharaoh presenting Ma'at to the god. See all that, and as you're walking down, I'm looking at these scenes in this tomb. I'm thinking, I'm listening to my inner voice, and I'm just moved, and I'm not even realizing it until I hear the sound in my own ears. You got to go to that lonesome valley. You No one can go there for you. Y'all know that good old good one. They taking you to the cemetery. We're in the valley of the kings and queens, and something about the word valley just stuck in my mind. You got to go to that lonesome valley. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No one can go there. No one can go there for you. Mm-hmm. Now, if y'all have ever seen the film "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" George Clooney and him about to be executed by the sheriff in the middle of the woods, and they got these three black men about to dig their grave in their own stripes, prison stripes. That on the soundtrack, that song is sung by the Fairfield Four. Some of y'all know about the Fairfield Four, them gospel quartets, and them brothers stand back up off that grave. You got to go to the lonesome valley. And when you see them in the movie, the faces, that's the face of Seti the First. I have looked in the face of Seti the First at this point 10, 11 times. Stood before the alabaster statue of Seti the First in the Luxor Museum as he stands there. Seti the First is a very pious man. Yes, he was a military general. Seti the First, and by the way, of course, we remember in a recent a new ancestor, Alma Powell, the wife of Colin Powell, did so much for young people, so much as an educator out of Birmingham, Alabama. Her father worked at the same high school as Condoleezza Rice's daddy during the segregated days. Their politics and not our politics in terms of me. I guess not Condoleezza Rice, but their parents wished a better world for them. But anyway, Alma Powell made transition recently, but her husband, Colin Powell, was a general. I don't know about his faith practices or what he did, but I don't know Seti the First either, but that was a military man. He was very pious. And when you see how he curates his idea of what it means to be in conversation with the divine, it just came out of me. I saw the faces of the Fairfield Four looking like those Saku, those mummies. And so I started humming, you got to go through the Lonesome Valley. What does time mean there? It ain't 2024. It's not 1530 BC. Is African time. And in that moment, those numbers collapse and resolve themselves into a way of knowing that binds us heart to heart, binds us spirit to spirit, binds us as a global community of African people with common ways of knowing. And at that point, we ask, what are we doing? What is our intent? Our intent should always be to connect. And so if people want to come in with their cultures, that's fine. But what we're not going to do, just like what the Nubians didn't do, what the Egyptians didn't do, we're not going to take your culture as our culture. Just like the Chinese and dating are not going to do, we're not going to take your culture as our culture. We can speak your language. Just like them boys swimming in the Nile Valley to welcome us to Elephantine Island and get a couple of dollars that they could use to bring home to their families. They can speak many languages. But when they they're gonna go into whatever language you speak. Is it French? Is it Spanish? There's a lot of Spanish here right around this time of year. In the summertime, the Northern Europeans don't come. Also, the Europeans in settler places like New Zealand and Australia, they don't come. But a lot of Asians here. We saw this young sister from Chile as we were in the tomb of the Pyramid of Teti, looking at the pyramid texts. We came out. We had seen her on the Giza Plateau. Then we in the Great Pyramid. Then we saw her again at Teti. We go a lot of places a lot of people don't go. We, by the estimate of the travel folk we travel with, Mary Hanani and Consolidated, and her brother Hatem, who runs Travel House here in Egypt, we go to about a third more sites than most places. Many places we're the only people there because people don't know to go. We go to Tao Tep, Kagemi, different places. But when we do see people, they are, if they're white, they're usually not U.S. or Great Britain white. They're usually white people from other places in the world, and Italian, Spanish, this kind of thing. And we see a lot of people who are not African, not white, but who are from other places. A lot of Asians, a lot of Chinese and Koreans. So I want to kind of wind up today just thinking about this in the context of world politics, because we're not divorced from what's going on in the world, even as we're immersed in the ancient world and being in community with this. While we have been here, I watch the news every day. I read the news sites. I mean, I don't have the physical paper, but I was able to get on. We had a little window. Usually, when normally we would be in conversation, Lamont King and I on Sirius, in our conversation, we're out, but we had a little window day before yesterday when I was able to get on with Lamont for the last hour and a half, about hour. with the morning conversation, Urban View channel 126, and on your Urban View dial, get that Urban View dial. And by the way, I love the fact that the app works everywhere. So while the terrestrial radio, satellite radio is North America, the app works everywhere because I've been listening here in the Nile Valley. But in the conversation, just weighing in, we were here when Tim Walz was introduced as the vice presidential candidate on the Kamala Harris ticket, on Vice President Harris's ticket. And we were here when Donald Trump, in an act of desperation, and I understand the desperation, even as we should be very mindful, check your voter registration. That's what we've been saying, all of us. Check your voter registration. And by the way, check your voter registration, because we know that they done switched out so many of the election officials. In Georgia, they've taken the power away from the Secretary of State. They can replace election officials all over Fulton County, Gwinnett County. So in other words, they're lining it up to steal it. So it's going to have to be a lot of battle. But the first thing is check your voter registration, as you were talking, Professor Hunter, and continue to talk with any number of people, including our brother Eli Mistal. But in that process, we're watching, and Donald Trump, of course, is desperate. He doesn't have a way to attack Kamala Harris directly. And so, he called a press conference and did what he does. Donald Trump knows that a worm is eating his brain. He knows that he's addled, and he also knows and understands better than any politician, perhaps in the history of U.S. politics, that the idiocracy that we call the United States of America can't look away from a car crash. So in order to stop Kamala Harris, to stop, at least pause or slow the momentum of Harris and Walz, he said, let me call a press conference in my gold fauceted junkyard, in my millionaire version of Sanford and Son. Let me call a press conference and stand there and rant, and was it Willie Brown or Jerry Brown? Was it a plane crash or a plane elevating? I mean, he talked bad about Kamala Harris, and it don't matter what I say. I'm rambling. Oh, didn't he ramble? And we watched, but it doesn't slow the momentum. So we've been paying attention to what's going on in the world, and it's very interesting to see it here. We're in Egypt. We stopped at the tomb of Mohammed Anwar Sadat. Anwar Sadat, of course, president of Egypt, as we've talked about every time we come here. We talked about it last year. We sat there, and a lot of the Egyptians didn't know that in the United States of America, the great Louis Gossett Jr., who, of course, made transition, and we marked him, and we talked about this. He played Anwar Sadat in that American film, Sadat. And, it took a Black American, Anwar Sadat, whose mother was from Sudan, Anwar Sadat, who followed Gamal Nasser, the first president of modern, quote unquote, Egypt, independent Egypt. Anwar Sadat, who said upon taking power that he was the first pharaoh to sit on the throne of Egypt in 2,000 years. In other words, this gesture towards, I'm a Nubian. This is Anwar Sadat, who was murdered in broad daylight, right on the street at a military parade marking an anniversary of the 1973 war, the war that consumed this region. The war that consumed this region. We stood at the tomb of Anwar Sadat and had a conversation about what it means to be terrified in this moment of war, rumors of war. The conversation here in Egypt, among other things, is that, hoping that a war doesn't break out next week involving those actors that we have been following since at least October the 7th, and the aftermath, in which thousands, tens of thousands, almost half children killed indiscriminately in many ways, killed, murdered. And so when we watched the vice president give that Black woman look to people who were protesting her at a rally in Michigan, and read the accounts of the meeting of many of the folks who are against the war. I'm against the war. I'm dead set against the war. I'm dead set against every war, but certainly this war too. Read the accounts of her meeting, her and the vice presidential candidate Tim Walz meeting with representatives of the non-aligned movement, but the movement of those who voted non-committed, the uncommitted movement. and meeting with others, and her saying, I'm committed to ceasefire, I'm committed to stopping this. And I understand my very good friends, as Gerald would call him, Gerald Horn, our friends on the left, who would say it's not enough, it's a duopoly, they're all the same. Are they the same? With Donald John Trump and J.D. Vance and Junior Varsity Vance, would he have met? Would they have met? Even met with the protesters? No, well, that's just theater. Okay, is it just theater? You think that the Harris campaign does not know that school starts in the next couple of weeks? We come back to the United States, take a quick breather, and go right into school. And in Georgia, they in school already. They start school this week, high school students and junior high school and elementary school students. But I'm talking about college students. You think those protests aren't going to ramp back up? Which is why reading the Financial Times this morning, it was very interesting to see that a spokesperson for the National Security Advisor, John Kirby, came down hard on this megalomaniac finance minister for Israel, Brazil Simonish, who has said in previous years that the, the displacement of 2 million people in Gaza, which should be considered justified and moral. Again, what is your intent? My intent is to get all y'all off that land by any means necessary. Well, John Kirby, speaking for the U.S. National Security Advisor yesterday, said, look, on the 15th of August, the United States, Qatar, and Egypt are meeting again to try to get a ceasefire done, to try to, the next round. And they're calling for a deal. Look, Joe Biden put out a memo and said we need to expand the Supreme Court, put some age limits on this kind of thing. People say, you can't get it done. Yeah, but that's not why he did it. If you understand how politics works. If you don't think that the Democratic Party, let's just go to straight real politics trying to win an election. Let's assume that the same American Israel Political Action Committee that pumped $9 million to rent a Negro out of St. Louis named Wesley Bell, the same AIPAC that pumped millions of dollars to take out Jamal Bowman, the same AIPAC whose money is no good in Detroit, shout out to Sheila Tlaib, who won her primary, the same AIPAC whose money is no good in Minnesota, shout out to Ilhan Omar, yet the same AIPAC that will not register as it should as an agent of a foreign power, that same AIPAC, let's just assume that AIPAC controls the whole damn Congress. Let's just go all the way there for people who believe that. I don't believe that, but I don't think that to be true. But let's just assume that that's true. So you think for a minute that if the Democrats don't want to win this election, you think that Joe Biden is not trying to figure out a way to do a ceasefire to take that issue away from the white nationalists on the other side who have already said if we win, we're going to give Bibi Netanyahu everything we're giving him now. And also, we're going to mute any conversation about killing. Y'all can kill them all. Trump gets in, his son-in-law got the condos already in his addled little brain. If you don't think for a minute that there's a difference between those two parties and that the Biden side isn't trying to at least put the brakes on that, just think real politics. Forget morals. In fact, take morals out of this. Let's stop overburdening politics with the idea that you're projecting morality on politicians. If a politician got morals, that's great. But guess what? That's a bonus. A politician's not your friend. Politician's not your leader. Politician's not your God. Beyonce may be your God, but if you put the song up under Kamala Harris, that don't mean that Kamala is your God either. The vice president's your God either. She's a politician. And she stood at that rally in Michigan. And she said, I just met with y'all. I talked with y'all. I said, I'm supporting the ceasefire. We want to work to get that done. Meanwhile, the guy that put her in a position, well, no, black women put her in a position to win, followed by black men and then everybody else. But the guy who said, I endorse her, got his people over there trying to crack heads. They're going to meet on the 15th in this region to talk about this again. The Israelis not going to stop, okay? What's going to stop Israel is cutting off their weapons. It ain't going to be, in this region right now, they're terrified about, now, is it going to be an attack from Iran or attack on Iran? Is it going to come back and forth? You saw what happened with Hezbollah last week and the assassinations. Well, the people who do the living and dying in the world, they're not in the boardrooms. They're not at the negotiation tables. They're not at the banks. They're not sitting in the legislatures or in the executive suites of the rulers of the countries. They're just trying to live. They're just trying to go to get their job. They're just trying to get home to their family. They're just trying to go to church or mosque or synagogue. They're just trying to be in the world, but they are terrified right now. And it's very important for us to understand that in the United States of America, there are people who don't give a damn about you or me or them or anything but the issue they believe in. It could be a single issue entity like APAC, which Jimmy Carter said they doing their job. When you gonna do your job? Their job is one thing and one thing only. They don't give a damn Democrat, Republican, independent, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Sr. It don't matter. Robert F. Kennedy the third. They don't give a F about none of it. All they're saying, this is our issue. Fine, go with God. But there's more of us who believe in more than one issue. There are more of us who believe in our common humanity. And what is our intent? It involves sacrifice. It involves work. So yeah, we've been watching. And when she said, finally, after they wouldn't stop protesting, fine. She looked at him and said, okay, I believe in democracy. We all have a right, but I am speaking now. And then people start cheering, Kamala, Kamala. I'm like, this is dangerous, because the holy moralists, which is one thing we don't attribute, doesn't matter, morals or no morals, but the wholly unhinged from reality side, the white nationalists who have said kill them all, literally, you try to protest like that at a Klan rally, passing itself as a Trump rally, and see what happens. It might not even be the police that get to you. It might be Lauren Victoria Burke the other night on Roland Martin Unfiltered referred to Byron Donalds as a willing manservant. I said, Lauren, that's beautiful. See, it's one thing to be captive. It's another thing to be voluntarily captive. It might be the willing manservant Byron Donalds to try to tackle you if you try to protest. But my point is that this is politics. And in politics, you've got to understand the first thing you got to ask yourself is, what is our intent? And from there, you work your way forward. So we've been paying attention. We saw the vice president. We saw her, she's out there. The momentum is going. Financial Times is cracking me up because they're saying, will the economy bring down the sugar high of the Harris campaign? These people with the money people, the people who are going now beyond being able to be regulated by the state, they don't have the same interest that you have. Their interest is profit. Their interest is control. And so, the stock market's up, the stock market down. Do you know right now as we speak, a whole week of cycles, the stock market is crashing. Is that a bad thing for Democrats? Is it a good thing for the Republicans? The stock market, as we are sitting here now, is where it was before the roller coaster hit. So in other words, what are we talking about? Is it real? Is it not real? Elon Musk out there tweeting, Xing recklessly, whatever. Well, in Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, who won the election last week and who they tried to gin up and say, oh, he didn't win, it didn't count. And it has to be balanced because you see that Brazil is calling for the election results in Venezuela to be released. So are Colombia and Mexico, three quote unquote left-wing governments. You got to release those numbers at some point in Venezuela. But Elon Musk was talking crazy about him, talking about you need to take him out and all this kind of thing. Maduro cut off Twitter this week, called Elon Musk crazy and unhinged, and they in a war, except Elon Musk can't tweet into Venezuela right now because Maduro's got it off. So anyway, so yeah, we're paying attention again. It's just, we're grateful to be here. Prof, everybody sends their love. Hello. They want to know when you come in. All the Nubians, they cook every kind of food there is here. And, I lost 20 pounds in the last month or so, and I'm trying to lose more weight because I get this stomach completely off me. But they cooked up all these delicious things. That when is she coming? When is she coming? I said, she might come next year. She might come next year. She might not come for, So anyway.
Well, that's the plan. And barring war. And you getting your sexy on? Come on through, Dr. Carr.
No, I'm not getting my sexy. I'm trying to get my healthy on. That's all. I'm just trying to get
that healthy is sexy. That's the new sexy.
I love it. Healthy, the new sexy. I'm for it. I'm for the sexy.
Yeah. I'm glad because we need you here. And shout out to everybody who needs to be here, which is all of you. Take your health into you. That's one thing we have control over. And they trying to kill us. They trying to kill us. They got me reading now all the labels for all the kind of oils. I'm like, I can't even buy nothing now. I got to read all the labels. They snuck this Whole Foods and snuck some China stuff in there, some biomedical stuff in the food. I'm like, oh, Whole Foods, Bezos, we see you. No more.
Yeah, no more. It's a new year. It's a new. That's the other thing. I use this as a New Year's set. Talk about time. It's not December, January for me. It's usually August.
Yes.
Because we're 2 weeks away. I do some reflecting. So I've been thinking about, all the places I've been since August, with DuSable and them in February, with Kim Delaney and them, when we were in New Orleans with the National Black Social Workers. Leonard Dunstan's ritual was last week. Also, James Cragen, who was professor at Howard and one of the founders of the National Association of Black Social Workers. Of course, Martin Delaney, when we were out there with June, with Baba Kwaku, Larry Crow, and Mamo Labisi. So I do a lot of reflecting, a lot of planning, because we go back, school starts. So, I'm getting ready to teach these classes again at Howard, and increasingly again out of that, because we do what we're doing here. How are we going to do this new intro course iteration? How are we going to do that critical race theory mini course? And talking with Courtney Wilkerson about her students and how we get a next generation trained, I was thinking maybe we should do an Education in Black America conversation as well. And so a lot of planning, and then a lot of connecting. Like I said, Kemet, Africa, what's going on in the world, the connections, making those connections like I mentioned with Abitus and the Valley, just to refresh it. So in some ways, this becomes the reset time for me. And to do it in community is the best. You can't do it by yourself. There are moments you have to be quiet, but you have to be together. And so everybody sends their love. We're going this time next year. So the first 2 weeks of August, even if y'all can come the whole time.
No, I'm putting it on my calendar. I'm planning a bunch of stuff. 2026 trip to Brazil, already have perspectives for that. So you have to come to that. That'll be in January. So you put that on your calendar. Just map out the whole month of January 2026. So this will happen. And I got to meet Kim Delaney. She came to Healthy Wealthy Wise.
Did you see Dr. Delaney?
I got to get a hug.
I know y'all hit it off.
Yeah, no, man, it was so beautiful. But this is the common theme. Michael Harriot came and whispered, first of all, we are going to have a mass exodus from Twitter. Not yet. Because when we do it, we got to do it. Like, there's got to be so many people leaving on the same day that it's undeniable that this is a thing that's happening because of him. We have to mount that. So I was thinking the day after Election Day, but people said, let's do it on Martin Luther King Day, Inauguration Day.
Well, it depends on what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Depends on what's going to happen.
Anyway, I'm going to say less about that. But
no, we say this. And look, on the 24th of August, we get back. We're going to be at Sankofa, Mike and I. We're going to have a conversation around his book, Black AF History. I think it says 6:30 to 8 at Sankofa. So it'll be good to see the good brother.
He and his wife, they had a good time. But he was like, listen, we don't want them coming to Nubia. He was like, let's preserve the sanctity. This is a special sacred place. And I was like, bet. So I've been in the lab trying to figure out a place that's public facing, not this sanctuary that we have here. So shout out to the Nubians. Y'all ain't got to worry. We never gonna open this up to the public.
No question.
But
they want people. I see the people in the chat want to know where in Brazil.
Mind your business. Wait, when it comes, it'll come. Like, everybody, just relax. I'll put it out. Don't worry. Don't worry. Get together. Be ready. When it's time to drop, I'll probably drop it around December. The link and everything. But
look for the Kemet information probably within a month or so, because we met with the general manager at the Sonesta St. George in Luxor. Good brother. It's amazing when you just out of the country and you meet good people. And they are it's obviously it's good people from every cultural background. But when you come in a space and everybody from the general manager of the hotel to the cats bringing your bags and stuff, greet you with the salam and give you the double cheek kiss, and everybody calling everybody Habibi, which is like a term of affection. I get on the bus, Habibi, Habibi, it's good to see you, Professor. We miss you. We owe you. Welcome to our country. I see these cats every year, and he was saying, the best time to do that kind of momentum building thing is right in the wake of the time you've done it before. So this will be an inaugural trip, of course, as you're saying, planning for Brazil. But here in Kemet, we go every year. So you look for that information probably within a month. We want to make some adjustments because, people we run people ragged, and we've made some adjustments this year. So, but this is the time to be in touch with the world.
Listen, like I said, there's no better group of people to travel with, because it's not just a safe place. You feel at home with these folk, being in South Carolina, it's different. We're not just random folk. People met at the airport, didn't know each other. There were two people playing spades. I put two people together because they didn't have a partner. Come to find out they're distant cousins.
What?
Yeah, didn't know each other, but then where you from? Da da da. And they like, oh, we got cousins in common. family people
That's
that
crazy.
met over cards realize they live down the street from each other, like they're in the same
That
neighborhood. Like it's, so we are we are
that's
we are
crazy.
one we are one in a way that we don't even know, but we can't know it until
But
we get into community. So this is
until we
important
get
that we travel and together. Yes.
It's true. Dr. Sharon Johnson, of course, and Sister Alita, who is always the proud Nubians, always in. They went to elementary school together when they were 5 years old, then 6 years old in New York, Brooklyn, 7 years old, and then I think Alita's family moved first. Then Sharon ended up on the West Coast. They hadn't seen each other in almost 50 years. And
Wow.
then they here now together, and they like, I said, y'all look like two first grade girls. They done spent the whole so I mean, it's that connection. It's very true. Ginger is right. Regardless, because I know part of that trip, whenever it happens in Brazil, wherever we going, that Bahia gonna be in the guy go to the black
Oh no,
part. But
Bahia is central. So
oh
I
yeah,
was just going through the prospectus this weekend.
okay.
It's like, no, we ain't going to Brazil unless we're going to Bahia.
Got
Like
to go to Bahia,
period,
no
right?
question, no
So
question. But so I just mentioned it because Ginger said in the chat here, passport office is behind, so get renewed or get passport now. Yeah, independent of trips, get your passport,
I was
folks.
gonna say sometimes we do these things so that you can do the thing that you're supposed to do anyway. So if it takes a trip to entice you, I'm always out here with the is there an African version of the Trojan horse? Because I think that story must be African.
Yeah. Oh wait, I had to think about it. Yeah. The story was Somerset. I didn't tell it, and I'm gonna do it now. But it involves what could be called a Trojan horse, except they're using time. They use the sun and the moon to play a game called Sonnet. It's a whole. In fact, I bought a game, a Sonnet box, but just to study up some more on it. But a book actually on Egyptian games. But yeah, there's a version.
Love it.
There's
Okay.
there's absolutely a
So yeah,
version.
so we're going on a trip. Get your passport
Get
because
your passport, y'all. Get your
you never know.
passport.
All right.
Oh, well,
I
love you.
love you
You
too.
know,
Love everybody. We'll see everyone on Monday in
yeah,
office hours. Some of you
office
on
hours.
Sirius XM. I'll see you at 3 p.m. Eastern. All right, Dr. Carr.
Yes,
Be safe. Safe travel. Get back home
yes,
safely.
yes, indeed. Talk to you soon. Love
Okay. All right. Love you
you.
too. Bye.